This one's not even worth listening to." The words hung heavy in the air as Mitchell's finger jabbed toward me. The boardroom of Harborview Dynamics, packed with 20 of the region's most powerful business figures, went still. Their eyes flicked nervously between Mitchell's son of CEO Richard Langford and me, the woman he thought had no place at that table. Mitchell stood tall in a $2,500 suit, smug and untouchable. His father stayed glued to his notes, willfully blind. I inhaled slowly, kept my voice calm. "That's interesting coming from you." I slid a plain manila folder across the table. Mitchell hesitated, then opened it. The change in his expression was immediate confidence drained from his face like ink in water. He glanced from the folder to me. Who are you?" he stammered. I stood straight in my blazer and spoke clearly. "My name is Evelyn Ward. My grandfather Thomas Ward founded this company in 1964. Gasps rippled across the room. Richard Langford looked up stunned. "And starting today, I said things are going to be different. Before I explain how it all unfolded, thank you for being here. Most people hear stories like this, but don't subscribe, then miss the moment where everything shifts. If you've ever been dismissed or underestimated, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Let me take you back to how it all began. Just 3 months earlier, I joined Harborview as an entry-level analyst. I was 34 years old with an MBA and 6 years of experience, but still relegated to fetching coffee and taking notes. My grandfather had built Harborview from his basement, raising 4 children after his wife passed away. He introduced profit-sharing 4-day work weeks and paid caregiver leave long before it was mainstream. When he retired in 2009, he sold the company to Richard Langford under strict conditions to protect the culture and employees. Somewhere along the way, those values got lost. And that's exactly why I returned, not to reclaim a title, but to restore what my grandfather built. And I came in prepared, because when legacy is underestimated, quiet power speaks loudest. What most people didn't know was that my mother, Judith Ward, inherited a significant portion of Harborview Dynamics voting shares when my grandfather stepped down. She remained a silent investor, never visiting the corporate offices or engaging publicly with company leadership. But I grew up hearing stories how Harborview began in a basement in Burlington, Vermont. How my grandfather built something meaningful during a time when small-town entrepreneurs weren't taken seriously, and how he treated his employees like family. Over the past year, though, troubling signs reached our doorstep. Employee satisfaction had collapsed. Turnover hit an all-time high. The Harborview Foundation, once known for generous community support, had quietly reduced its grants by 80%. "These numbers look fine," my mother said, flipping through the glossy quarterly report. "But this survey data doesn't lie. Something's off." That's when we formed a plan. I'd apply under my married name, Evelyn Shaw, which no one at Harborview would connect to the founding Ward family. My mission: observe, document, and if needed, give my mother cause to use her long unused veto power to force structural change. From day one, the contrast was obvious. The collaborative culture my grandfather prized had been replaced by cold efficiency. Teams barely spoke across departments, executives stayed locked behind glass doors, and keycard access on the upper level. Then, I met Mitchell Langford. He was only 35, just a year older than me, but carried himself with the smug entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. As the newly appointed VP of Operations and the CEO's only son, he saw himself as the future of Harborview. "You must be the new admin," he said, walking into the conference room while I prepped materials. "Let's get those water pitchers filled before the real meeting starts." And I take my coffee black. 2 sugars? "I'm Evelyn, new project analyst," I replied, offering my hand. He barely glanced at it. "Right. Still make sure those pitchers are full." This became our pattern. He gave orders. I complied on the surface, but behind the scenes, I documented everything. Every stolen idea, every snide remark, every instance where women were talked over and men were celebrated for less. Mitchell had no idea what he was waking up. Eliza from Digital Strategy had crafted a campaign that nearly doubled engagement. Mitchell presented it as his own. Tomas from product development was written up for insubordination after raising concerns about a rushed safety testing timeline. Small injustices stacked up. One by one, they painted a picture my grandfather would have found unrecognizable. But then it got worse. I discovered inconsistencies in the financials line items that didn't make sense. Company funds had been diverted to outside consulting firms, most tied to former classmates of Mitchell's from business school. Customer complaints were flagged but never resolved, just quietly deleted from the internal system. "How bad is it?" my mother asked during one of our weekly evening calls. "Worse than we expected," I told her. "The values Grandpa built this place on. They're just bullet points on a plaque now." Over time, I found allies, people who still cared. Daniela from HR dug up historical employee satisfaction surveys that clearly showed a downward trend. Winston in accounting confirmed unusual vendor payments. Even Richard's longtime executive assistant, Bernice, who had once worked directly with my grandfather, confided in me. "Thomas would be sick if he saw what this place has become," she whispered late one evening. He poured his heart into Harborview. "What changed?" I asked her. "Richard used to lead with integrity," she said. "But once Mitchell came on 5 years ago, it all shifted. Richard started handing him the reins, and he grabbed everything he could. We needed evidence, indisputable proof to justify a shareholder intervention. And I knew the perfect opportunity was coming: the quarterly board meeting where key strategic decisions would be discussed. I spent nights preparing a full market analysis, showing how returning to Harborview's founding values could increase both morale and profitability. I organized supporting documents, printed backup copies, and loaded the slides onto a secure flash drive. That night, I placed a black and white photo of Grandpa Thomas on my nightstand. "Wish me luck," I whispered before turning off the light. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, the meeting began. Mitchell stood to deliver his strategic plan, and as the first slide loaded, my breath caught. It was my analysis, my exact words. With his name on them, he had stolen everything. "As you can see," Mitchell said confidently, "my approach will reposition Harborview to outpace competitors within 2 quarters. My hand rose before I could stop it. "Excuse me." Heads turned. Mitchell's smile faltered. "I believe there's been a mistake," I said. "That analysis? Those slides were submitted by me last month. I have the originals with timestamps and metadata." A ripple of discomfort spread across the room. Mitchell forced a dry laugh. "If this story stirred something in you, go ahead and hit subscribe, because what happens next might just change the way you see leadership, loyalty, and legacy forever." "I'm not sure what our note-taker is referring to," he said dismissively. "Maybe she saw some early drafts." "That's not true," I replied louder now. "This is my work, word for word." Then his mask slipped. "This garbage doesn't even belong in the room," Mitchell snapped, pointing directly at me. "She's here to take notes, not speak." Gasps. Silence. Which brings us back to where this story began. I reached for the manila folder and slid it across the table. Inside, a notarized document confirming my identity as Evelyn Ward, granddaughter of Thomas Ward. A copy of my grandfather's original sale agreement containing ethics clauses. And a board succession plan granting emergency oversight to my mother, Judith Ward, if company values were compromised. Just as the room processed the contents, the boardroom door opened. Judith Ward walked in for the first time in over a decade. Several older board members visibly recoiled in surprise, her resemblance to my grandfather unmistakable. "I believe my daughter has raised legitimate concerns," she said calmly, taking the seat usually reserved for Richard Langford. Richard finally spoke. "Judith, this is highly irregular. There are proper channels." "Proper channels," my mother cut in. "Like the falsified quarterly reviews. The sanitized compliance reports that skipped over 7 discrimination complaints in the past year." I handed each board member a folder of evidence, months of documentation exposing mismanagement, hostile culture, and financial abuse. For the next hour, Judith and I walked the board through it all. Mitchell sat frozen. Richard swung between bluster and silence as the board's control slipped away. "What now?" asked Desiree, the longest-serving board member. My mother looked at me, then back at the table. "That depends," she said, "on whether you're ready to rebuild what Thomas Ward actually created." A few executives stayed past midnight quietly clearing their offices. Clearing out, I asked Bernice the next morning. She nodded. 3 VPs close to Mitchell gone. They saw which way the wind's blowing. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Hope. Is it true? She asked softly. You're really Thomas Ward's granddaughter? I nodded. She took my hand. I've waited over a decade for this. By morning, word had spread. As employees trickled in, many looked at me differently, some with curiosity, others avoiding eye contact entirely. At 9:00 a.m., my mother called an all-hands meeting in the central atrium. Nearly 400 employees gathered, murmuring with anticipation. Richard Langford stood stiffly beside her as she took the mic. I'm Judith Ward, she began. Many of you don't know me, but my father founded this company. And today, I'm stepping forward to ensure it returns to what it was always meant to be. Then she turned to me. And now, I'd like to introduce my daughter, Evelyn. I stepped forward. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. Most of you know me as Evelyn Shaw, a project analyst who joined 3 months ago, I said. What you don't know is why I came. I explained how Thomas Ward built Harborview to value every voice, no matter the role. I spoke of what I'd seen. Dismissed ideas, isolated departments, silenced innovation. But today, I continued, we're starting something new. Or rather, something old restored. I outlined the new Ethics Committee anonymous reporting channels and the Cultural Renewal Plan. Some faces lit up, others remained wary. Change won't happen overnight, I admitted. But it starts now, with action, not just talk. And it needs all of you. Afterward, my office filled with employees, sharing stories, suggestions, even files they'd hidden for months. I barely had time to breathe. Meanwhile, Mitchell reported to customer service for his reassignment. Petra, the department director, met him at the door. Your headset, she said flatly. Shadow Tyler this morning. You'll take calls this afternoon? This is absurd, he muttered. Petra crossed her arms. Welcome to real work. You'll shadow Kyrie this morning? Petra told Mitchell flatly, handing him a headset. This afternoon you're on the phones solo. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I have an MBA from... That won't help you calm a client whose shipment arrived 2 days late, Petra cut in. Here we value empathy and real-time problem solving. Degrees don't teach that. I received hourly updates about Mitchell's first day. He removed his headset multiple times during difficult calls. He argued with Petra about hold times and refund protocols. By close of business, his customer satisfaction rating was the lowest ever recorded in the department. He won't last a week, Daniela from HR said during our end-of-day debrief. He doesn't get that luxury, I replied. This is his only route back to credibility. The first month was chaotic. Richard Langford resisted almost every reform, especially those involving financial transparency. 2 more executives resigned rather than adapt to a culture that no longer rewarded politics over people. My mother joined daily leadership meetings, calmly redirecting conversations that tried to revert to the old guard's ways. Meanwhile, I focused on reviving Harborview's innovation pipeline. We built cross-functional teams to evaluate ideas purely on merit. Within weeks, buried proposals saw daylight again. Eliza from digital marketing, the same Eliza whose campaign Mitchell once claimed as his own, was promoted to lead our digital transformation. Tomas in product development received full backing to enhance safety testing protocols he'd been warning about for months. Momentum was building, but the real tension unfolded in customer service. Mitchell's performance was still abysmal. Clients complained about his tone. Colleagues reported him for trying to delegate his tasks. Petra documented every misstep, assembling a file thick enough to justify dismissal. 6 weeks in, Mitchell didn't show up for work. Security footage showed him on the executive floor, entering his father's office using an active key card. I found them both inside guilty expressions, closed laptops. This isn't what it looks like, Richard said. It looks like Mitchell is dodging his responsibilities, I replied coolly. And you're helping. This punishment has made its point, Mitchell argued. I've learned my lesson. Have you? I asked. Because speak more carefully in public isn't the lesson we're teaching here. Mitchell didn't say people deserved respect. He didn't acknowledge he'd been wrong, just that he needed to be more careful in public. "Your reassignment continues," I said firmly. "And Richard, the next breach of our agreement goes directly to the board." That evening, my mother called. "Mitchell's grandmother wants to meet with us." His grandmother? I didn't realize she was still alive. She is. Very much so. Imogene Bartlett. She's 85 and still sharp as a blade. The name triggered something. Wait, wasn't she on Harborview's board when Grandpa was running the company? They were friends before the acquisition, my mother confirmed. She was also Harborview's first outside investor. Now she wants to see us tomorrow morning. We arrived at her colonial home in the historic district just after sunrise. A housekeeper led us to a bright sunroom where Imogene sat in a wingback chair, regal and composed. "You look just like Thomas," she told my mother. "And you," she said to me, "have his mind. Undercover. He would have loved that." "You knew him well?" I asked. "We were business partners before we were friends. When banks refused to back him after your grandmother passed, I stepped in." She gestured to a photo of herself and my grandfather at Harborview's groundbreaking ceremony. "Then, why support Richard's buyout?" my mother asked. Imogene's expression tightened. "You were building your career. Your brothers had no interest. Richard seemed stable, someone who'd preserve what Thomas built. I never imagined my grandson would unravel it all. That's why we stepped in," I said. "Demoting him to customer service wasn't revenge. It was a wake-up call." "You've bruised his ego," Imogene replied. "But have you shifted his understanding?" That question landed hard. "What would you suggest? He lacks context," she said. "Mitchell thinks Harborview is his inheritance, not something built with sacrifice. He needs education, not just consequences." She proposed a plan. Mitchell would stay in customer service, but also spend one evening a week with her. She'd show him original ledgers, introduce him to retired employees, and walk him through the principles that built the company. "He still listens to me," she said softly. "Let me try." My mother and I exchanged glances and nodded. "We can add it to his program," I said cautiously, "but the customer service role still stands." "As it should," Imogene replied. "Mitchell needs both the stick and the carrot, I'm afraid." When we told him about the additional requirement, his response surprised me. "Grandmother wants to meet with me every week about company history." For the first time since his demotion, he looked curious, maybe even hopeful. "She believes it'll help you understand Harborview's origins," I said. "Fine," he muttered, trying to sound indifferent. "If that's what it takes to get through this, whatever it is." But the following weeks brought subtle shifts. He stopped arriving late. Petra noted fewer complaints. He still stumbled through difficult calls, but he asked questions in training. He even stayed after one shift to review notes with Kyrie. At the same time, the broader transformation was gaining momentum. Our ethics committee, made up of team members across every level, began reviewing outdated policies. Several were flagged and rewritten. Sales ticked upward. Customer feedback scores improved. The innovation teams pushed forward fast-tracking projects that had been shelved for years. Eliza's digital initiative launched 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Tomas's revised safety protocol was implemented without delay. Richard Langford remained unpredictable, cooperative one day, defensive the next. My mother handled him with tact, preserving his pride while reducing his unchecked authority. 3 months after the boardroom shakeup, we gathered the entire company to relaunch Harborview's Employee Scholarship Program, something Thomas Ward started decades ago, but Mitchell had defunded years prior. As I stepped up to announce the new recipients, I spotted Mitchell standing in the back, still distant, but engaged in a way he hadn't been before. Imogene appeared beside him and rested a hand on his shoulder. After the ceremony, he approached me. "My grandmother showed me the original scholarship papers," he said. "She told me your grandfather wrote personal letters for every recipient." I nodded. He believed education could change everything. "She wrote one for my mother," he said quietly. "Did you know that I froze?" "No, I didn't. She was a receptionist here before marrying my dad. Judith helped her get her degree." His voice had softened. His eyes carried something I hadn't seen before, maybe humility. "I never knew that. My parents never told me." Before I could respond, Mitchell turned and walked away, leaving me wondering what other revelations Imogene had shared during their weekly talks. The next morning, Petra called my direct line, her voice taut with disbelief. "You need to come to customer service? Now." I rushed downstairs expecting the worst, a meltdown, a walkout, maybe a client confrontation. Instead, I found Mitchell seated at his station, calmly guiding a customer through troubleshooting steps on a legacy billing platform. "Thank you for your patience, Mrs. Haskins," he said gently. "Let's try one more solution." His tone was steady. Empathetic, even. When the call ended, he made careful notes in the system, then queued up the next without hesitation. "He's been like that all morning," Petra whispered. "Same yesterday. It's like someone flipped a switch." I watched him for several minutes. The transformation wasn't complete. I still saw flashes of frustration, but the effort was real. Later that week, I visited Imogene, curious about what had sparked the change. I showed him the early ledgers, she said, pouring tea. When Thomas didn't take a salary just to cover payroll. The second mortgage he took out to fund the first expansion. The acquisition deals he turned down because they didn't honor employee protections. And that meant something to Mitchell. He respects builders. She said, "He's always valued legacy. He just never understood how fragile it is." And I told him about his mother. He mentioned that. I said, "He didn't mention how it shook him." She replied, "He believed success came from connections." Learning that his mother was once a receptionist and earned her degree through Harborview's scholarship program that rattled his foundation. 4 months into our cultural overhaul, Mitchell's customer service term was ending. The ethics committee was scheduled to evaluate his future. As chair, I recused myself to ensure fairness. But that morning, I received an unexpected email from Mitchell requesting a one-on-one meeting. He arrived precisely on time, wearing khakis and a simple button-down instead of his usual designer suit. "I want to withdraw from consideration for any executive position," he said the moment he sat down. I blinked. Why? He exhaled. "Because I'm not ready. And now I know it. These past few months have shown me just how much damage I've caused," Mitchell said, "and how far I still have to go." I studied him carefully, watching for signs of strategy or performance. "What are you proposing instead?" "I want to create a new role, Community Impact Coordinator," he said. "I'd work with the ethics committee to rebuild trust with employees who left, clients we alienated, and community partners we've ignored." It was thoughtful, it addressed real needs, and it placed him in a position to contribute without giving him power he hadn't earned. "This isn't what I expected from you," I admitted. 4 months ago, I called you worthless," he said softly. "I thought power meant making others feel small. I was wrong." He paused. "Our grandmothers built something more important than authority. I'm just starting to understand that now." His words felt sincere, but I'd learned to be cautious. "The committee will consider your proposal," I said, "alongside other options. That's all I ask." He stood, then hesitated. "One more thing. I owe you a public apology. Not because I have to, because it's right." The next morning, at the company-wide meeting, Mitchell asked to speak. Richard looked uneasy. My mother sat quietly, arms folded. The room went silent as Mitchell took the mic. 4 months ago, I humiliated Evelyn Ward in front of this company," he began. "I called her worthless. I dismissed her voice. I was wrong." A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. "She's not just the founder's granddaughter. She's someone who believed in Harborview enough to fight for it when I was helping tear it down." He went on describing the lessons he'd learned, the people he'd spoken with, the stories that had opened his eyes. His privilege still showed in moments, but the vulnerability was real. When he finished, it was Imogene who applauded first. Others followed, hesitant, then steady. Not everyone clapped. Some wounds were still too deep, but it was a beginning. The next day, the ethics committee shared their decision. Mitchell would not return to executive leadership. Instead, his new title was approved, Community Impact Coordinator, with a 1-year probation and quarterly reviews. It was accountability, finally on Harborview's terms. A year after that boardroom reckoning, Harborview Dynamics had changed. Employee retention improved by 40%. Innovation flourished again. The culture began to echo my grandfather's original vision, not perfectly, but authentically. Richard Langford announced his retirement. The board confirmed they would begin an external search for a new CEO the following year, with my mother Judith leading the selection committee. As for Mitchell, his progress wasn't flawless, but it was real. He worked alongside team members he once dismissed, learning from their experience. The Community Impact Initiative gained momentum, mending relationships he'd helped fracture. During our annual charity gala, I found myself alone with him on the terrace. The ballroom buzzed behind us, but out here it was quiet. "Your grandfather would be proud," Mitchell said. His voice was softer now. "You brought back his legacy." "We brought it back," I corrected. "Together." He shook his head. "No, you did something harder. You could have destroyed me. You had every reason. But you didn't. That was never the goal," I said. "I see that now. Power isn't about control. It's about transformation." He looked out at the skyline. "My grandmother once told me that your grandfather used to say, when you have the power to destroy someone and choose instead to educate them, you make an ally, not a casualty." I smiled. "That sounds like Thomas." "I'm still learning," Mitchell admitted. "Some days are harder than others. But that day, you revealed yourself. It felt like the worst day of my life. Now, I know it was the best." 1 year after stepping into Harborview as a project analyst, I stood on stage at our employee summit, facing a crowd that now reflected energy, not fatigue. "My grandfather built Harborview on a radical idea," I said, "that a company could put people first and still thrive. That innovation starts when every voice matters. That leadership is about lifting others, not stepping on them." In the front row sat my mother, Imogene Richard, in quiet retirement, and Mitchell no longer the entitled heir, but a respected contributor. "This transformation," I said, "proves my grandfather was right." Then I introduced our newest initiative, the Thomas Ward Innovation Center, where employees could build, explore, and create during paid hours. The room erupted in applause. As I stepped back from the podium, the weight of the past year hit me all at once. My mission hadn't been to destroy Mitchell Langford or even to punish him, though he certainly deserved accountability. My true revenge wasn't loud. It was this: restoring Harborview Dynamics to what my grandfather had envisioned, and making those who once distorted that vision witness its return and ultimately help rebuild it. Watching Mitchell become a vocal advocate for the values he once disdained wasn't a compromise. It was the triumph. The same man who once called me worthless now understood the inherent worth in every person across every level of this company. Because sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation, not just of systems or policies, but of people. My grandfather understood that when he launched this company 60 years ago with an open-door policy and a belief in shared success. And I understand it now, watching his legacy bloom once more. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. I hope it leaves you thinking about your own story, your own workplace, your own version of quiet strength. Maybe someone once underestimated you. Maybe they dismissed your voice, your experience, or your ideas. Maybe you're still carrying the sting of that. But remember, sometimes the people who wrong us most are capable of the greatest growth if we're strong enough to lead with integrity instead of anger and show them what real leadership looks like. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this journey with me. I didn't share my story for sympathy. I shared it because I know I'm not alone. Maybe you've worked somewhere that forgot what it meant to value people. Maybe someone made you feel invisible, overlooked, or less than you are. I want you to know your worth isn't determined by titles, corner offices, or who signs your paycheck. Your worth is in what you build, what you stand for, and how you show up when others don't. So if this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever seen someone change, truly change after doing harm? Do you think it's possible? I'm still learning too. Still making sense of how we lead with strength without losing compassion. What this experience taught me is that transformation, real transformation, is the best revenge. Not because it's soft, but because it lasts. To anyone out there holding on to a sense of injustice, I say this: don't let someone else's ignorance make you abandon your values. Stay steady. Let your work speak. And when the time comes, don't just break the system, rebuild it better. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about rising through hardship, standing your ground, and leading with purpose, go ahead and subscribe. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Because sometimes the quietest voices lead the loudest change, and sometimes the people they once called worthless are the ones who save everything.